is one of the regulators appointed to regulate the capital market. So in this case, the capital markets can be defined as the financial markets that bring buyers and sellers of different kind of financial instruments, or maybe stocks. So you can have maybe this case stocks such as shares. You can have bonds, you can have foreign exchange currencies, and other financial assets. So that is the capital market. We can have buyers and of course sellers. And at the same time, in this case, we can have those who are having to facilitate this having to happen. So sometimes we call them intermediaries. Let's say, for example, like banks. Sometimes we call them intermediaries, like banks. So they are part of the financial system that is concerned with raising capital by dealing in shares, bonds, and other long-term investments. So capital markets include both the stock market and the bond markets. So in addition, they help people with ideas become entrepreneurs and help small businesses to grow. So the Capital Market Authority is set up under the Capital Market Authority Act to be able to regulate the financial market, to regulate the financial markets. So it is established under an Act of Parliament known as the CMA Act. So the objective of the Capital Market Authority is to do what? It is to safeguard the interests of investors. Because now in this case, there are so many players having to be involved. For example, as we are saying, we can have intermediaries like banks. We can have intermediaries like stockbrokers. So these intermediaries, they have to ensure that in this case, they are having to work in conformity with the requirements and of course fulfilling the needs of the investors. Where an investor feels is actually aggrieved, then the capital market will be there as a regulator to support or maybe facilitate the buying and selling of these kind of instruments by the investors. So the interest of the investors will actually be safeguarded by the Capital Market Authority Act. Then to develop a framework to facilitate the use of electronic commerce for the development of capital markets. So, so in this case, there is, for example, the central depository system that is normally set up under the Capital Market Authority Act to enable or maybe facilitate the buying and selling of shares or any other stock in a publicly listed company. So it is an electronic system. It is an electronic system whereby you don't have to manually transfer your shares, but in this case, it can be done electronically. Then to create and maintain and regulate the market in which the securities can be issued and traded in an orderly and fair and efficient manner. So there is some level of efficiency when the regulator is actually in place. Then to meet the contractual obligations of protecting investors from financial loss arising from the failure of licensed brokers or dealers. So these are the intermediaries we are talking about. So they are the middlemen who basically facilitate the buying or selling of shares by investors with those potential companies that are having to sell. So there is this regulator that is here to ensure these licensed brokers are having to do what? Fulfill the needs of the investors. Then to facilitate existence of a nationwide system of stock market and brokerage services so as to enable wider participation of the general members of the public. Then to develop all aspects of the capital markets with particular emphasis on the removal of impediments that could end up having or inhibit the trading down of the long-term developments of markets. So this particular authority is actually made up of the chairman. It has the chairman who is actually appointed by the president. It has 6 other members appointed by the relevant cabinet secretary. The permanent secretary to the treasury is also a member. The governor of the central bank, the attorney general, and of course the chief executive officer of that authority. So the functions is to license, for example, the intermediaries that are having to work in the stock exchange market. So like the ones you're talking about here, maybe investment banks or maybe stockbrokers. They are licensed by the CMA or the Capital Market Authority. Then it ensures proper conduct of all licensed persons and actually what market institutions. So those ones who are having to have some kind of a sphere, so they'll be able to, in this case, conduct themselves as expected. Then to regulate the issuance of capital market products, such as, for example, bonds or shares, etc. Then promote market development through research on new products and institutions. Then promoting investor education and public awareness about their rights as maybe investors or potential investors. Then to safeguard the interest of the investors. We have what we call the investor compensation fund. So in this kind of investment schemes, or this kind of investment collection funds, then there can be a chance that in this case there can be a loss having to happen. So the collective investment funds can actually end up having to be protected, whereby there can be a mechanism as to how in this case they can actually be compensated. So it is simply a fund established to pay compensation to retail investors in those situations in which the investment firm concerned is unable to pay over clients' assets due to its financial circumstances or maybe difficulties. So like in this case, maybe in the past, you've seen that some collective funds, investors have ended up having to lose their money. So there have been a number of cases or scenarios or maybe situations that happens, and in this case, they end up having to, for example, collect funds in an investment fund. Then, of course, in this case, they are promised to do a particular kind of investment, but they end up not having to achieve it. And of course, there is a chance they could lose money. But with this kind of a fund for compensation, then the interest of these investors can actually be protected. In any case, for example, there's a chance that they could actually end up having to lose their money. They could end up having to lose their money. So there are different entities under which, in this case, investors could end up having to be protected. Selection. For example, you can have banks that are involved in such. You can have insurance companies. We can have investment firms. So amongst others. So it looks to me like we had covered this particular area, but there's no harm. I think we can be able to go through it. Let me just start on topic number 4. So the Capital Markets Tribunal. So these are basically a tribunal set up in this case to resolve any matter of disputes of the parties involved in the capital markets. So in this case, the parties involved have already been able to indicate it can be investors, it can be the intermediaries, it can be the sellers. So any form of dispute having to arise concerning these parties, then of course it simply means that there is a set up tribunal to carry out investigations and of course give out, for example, a verdict or an award in case such a kind of parties are actually under dispute. So a tribunal is basically like an investigative body. In this case, we'll be able to investigate matters pertaining to the parties who basically play a role in the capital markets. So it could be maybe in this case, it is a dispute between maybe an investor and an intermediary or a stockbroker. So the Capital Markets Tribunal is actually there to resolve such kind of matters, whereby these parties can appear before such kind of a tribunal. And of course, they present their issues or matters. So they are listened to. And of course, in this case, the tribunal gives what we call an award. It gives what we call an award. I think we had covered this one. So the Capital Markets Fraud Investigation Unit. So fraud can end up having to happen in the capital markets. Frauds can actually happen in the capital markets. So whereby in this case, as you're saying, maybe investors could end up having to be duped. Those who have different kind of stocks, different kind of maybe bonds, or those who are having to facilitate the sale of such kind of maybe bonds or stocks would end up having to defraud potential investors. So a fraud could actually end up having to happen, whereby you think in this case, you could actually basically be investing your money in a safeguarded, maybe in this case, collection fund. But yet in this case, that kind of a collection fund is like a fraud. Like what you've just seen in this case, what is actually having to happen, maybe those ones who ended up having to deposit money with a Cifa-Cpa. So they ended up having to lose their money. So as to why in this case, that kind of a circle was actually having to be run, is like it was a perpetration of a fraud by the founder or the owner of that particular circle. So this can actually end up having to happen in the capital markets, whereby you end up having to put your money where in this case you've been lied to, you've been duped to, you've been given false representations to rely upon investment decision. If that is the case, then you can end up having to lose your money. So in case such kind of example actually happen, then you can have an investigative unit that ends up having to carry out investigations of matters pertaining to fraud, which may include fraudulent sale of a client share, insider trading or market manipulations, stealing of client funds, manipulation of the client records, among other offenses. So that is the investigative unit is actually simply set up in this case under the Capital Market Authority Act. So that in this case, it can be able to, for example, undertake investigations if such is actually going to happen or has actually happened. So the Capital Markets Fraud Investigative Unit, so it was actually set up, it was formed to make fraud investigation in the capital market more effective. So there will always be stored on this particular kind of units under the capital market authorities, for example, collection, analysis, and dissemination of relevant criminal intelligence within the market, then detection, prevention, and apprehension of offenders, offenders perpetrating fraud within the securities market, then investigation and prosecution of detected or reported cases relating to the securities market. Then to act as a liaison unit between the authority and, of course, the investigative agencies, which could be, for example, in this case, maybe the ethics and anti-corruption body. It could be, for example, in this case, the director of public prosecutions. It could be, for example, in this case, the DCI. So they'll be able to act as, in this case, a liaison in case of investigations having to ongoing on a particular fraud. Then coordinate with the authorities, investigation and enforcement department, whereby it takes up matters which have a criminal aspect for investigation. So it's like the first point of doc. In this case, for example, investigations are to be undertaken. Then assist members of the public in the spirit of utumishi kwa wote on relevant capital market issues that are having to arise. So examples of fraud of offenses in the capital markets, which could actually end up having to lead to this particular body having to carry out investigations, unauthorized variation of client details, that's manipulation of the client details, impersonation of investors and undertaking unauthorized transactions on their behalf, then collection and encashment of sales proceeds by fraudsters, posing as genuine investors, then insider trading, conducting trades in trade of securities on the basis of information that has not yet been released or has actually become public. That's what we mean by insider trading. Insider trading is whereby you take advantage of material information that could end up having to affect the prices of the shares of a company. And of course, in this case, you do what? Use that information to buy or sell more of the shares of a company. An example you can be able to say, for example, you could be an insider where at Safaricom. So an insider simply means maybe you are a director there, you are an employee there, you are maybe an expert, like an auditor who works at Safaricom as a company. So there's information that you're actually privy to that hasn't yet actually become public. Then you take advantage of it to do what? To maybe sell the shares of Safaricom or buy more of the shares of Safaricom. If you do such, then in this case, you'll be seen to have been involved in what? Insider trading or insider dealing, whereby you take advantage of information that could materially affect the prices of the shares of a company. In any case, for example, that information was actually made what? Public. That information was actually made public. Then we have what we call the International Organization of Securities, or IASFO. It is the international body that brings together the world's securities regulations and is recognized as a global standard setter for the securities sector. So is that now, in this case, umbrella body that the Capital Markets Authority is actually a member of. So the capital market authorities across the globe in different countries with jurisdictions are members of this particular body. She tries, in this case, for example, formulate policies and procedures that can be able to unify the securities market in the globe, in the world, or maybe in the world. So it is known as what? International Organization of Securities Commissions. So the CMA is actually one of the members of this particular body. So the IOSCO objectives and principles of securities regulation have been endorsed by both the G20 and, of course, the FSB, that is the Financial Stability Board, as the relevant standards in this particular area of capital markets across the world. There are overarching core principles that guide IOSCO in the development and implementation of internationally recognized consistent standards of regulation of the capital markets. So they form the basis for the evaluation of securities sector for the financial sector assessment programs of IMF or International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So the main objectives, to cooperate in developing and implementing, promoting adherence to internationally recognized consistent standards of regulation of financial markets or the capital markets. And of course, in this case, enhance or actually enforce policies to ensure that investors are actually protected across the world. Then to enhance investor protection and promote investor confidence in the integrity of securities market. So they protect the interest of investors across the world. So to exchange information at both global and regional levels. So there can be an exchange of information of practices in different countries. For example, Kenya can be able to compare notes to another country that is actually a member of that particular body as to how investment country can be able to do what maybe improve or put securities markets or financial markets that case. So that is known as what the IOSCO. So that is basically just a history about IOSCO. So we can start with topic number 4. Topic number 4. Our topic is about the intermediaries. So financial market intermediaries. So hope you're able to see the screen there. Are you able to see?
Yes.
Okay. So when you talk about intermediaries are now, in this case, I've already been able to explain them. They are those who facilitate the trading of securities, the financial markets. So they can be, for example, be stockbrokers, they can be investment banks. So we have different different entities that can be able to play such kind of role. So a market intermediary refers to an organization licensed by the Capital Market Authority to offer services to clients within the capital markets industry. These include services like, for example, how to purchase shares, how to make investment decisions. So they give investment advisory. So they become the financial market intermediaries. So they can be stockbrokers, investment banks, the other banks. They can be investment companies. So they are entities that help the issuing company and investing investors to perform various transactions in the capital markets. So these intermediaries play a very key role. So they basically facilitate or maybe support having to buy shares or sell them. So without them, and then in this case, you as an investor, you could end up not having to be able to do what? Maybe buy or sell your shares. So market intermediary principles. So market intermediaries are required to comply with standards for internal organization and operational conduct that aim to protect the interest of clients, ensure proper management of risk, and under which management of the intermediary accepts primary responsibility for these matters. It is the regulation that provides for minimum entry standards for the market intermediaries So these are basically principles to be observed by those ones who intend to, for example, in this case, become intermediaries to facilitate the trading of maybe shares or securities by investors and, of course, the selling companies. Then licensing of market intermediaries. So as you're saying now, in this case, the market intermediaries are licensed by the Capital Market Authority. And of course, now in this case, they'll be able to meet certain criteria before they actually done what may be licensed. So the types of licenses granted by the authority include, for example, they can be, in the market, intermediary licenses are given to various groups who qualify for the license. For example, we can have commodity brokers. We can have, this must be a company that will deal in commodity contracts only in the capacity of an agent for the buyers or sellers. So for them, in this case, they just act as what? The intermediaries, stockbrokers, middlemen. They don't actually basically, in this case, sell the securities by themselves. Commodity dealer, so it must be a company or entity that will have a double role in dealing in the commodity contracts in the capacity of a principal for the commodity dealer or as an agent or on behalf of the buyers and actually what? Sellers. So in this case, they are the persons in this case who can be able to do what? Maybe sell the securities by themselves. It's like in this case, the ones who are having to do what? At the same time, in this case, sell the securities and of course, at the same time, facilitate the sale of the securities. So they are the commodity dealers. So they are not like in this case, the middlemen, or for example, in this case, the brokers. So the brokers are just middlemen. So they just, in this case, know who's supposed to buy and who's actually selling. Then they make the two to meet together. But now the commodity dealer, they have, like in this case, the commodities by themselves. They can have the commodities by themselves. They can have the commodities by themselves. They can be able to sell by themselves. We can talk about, in this case, for example, maybe the investment companies. So they have different kind of what investment schemes or maybe commodities to be able to sell. So they are the dealers by themselves. They are the dealers by themselves. So they are the commodity dealers. Then we have commodity trading advisors. So you have investment advisors, investment advising firms that can be able to advise you which kind of investment you can be able to do what maybe make. So commodity trading advisor must also be in the form of a company which engage itself in the business of advising others, either directly through publications or writings as to the value of commodities, to the advisability of investing in, purchasing, or selling commodities contracts. So we have the commodity trading advisor, so they can be able to advise investors on which kind of, for example, investment schemes they can be able to invest in. So these ones also have to be licensed by the Capital Markets Authority. Commodity pool operators involve companies that carry on a business in the nature of collective investment scheme and who accept or receive from other persons funds, security, or property, either directly or through capital contributions of the sale of the shares. So you have, for example, in this case, maybe there are several companies, there are several investment companies we can be able to talk about. So we have, like, for example, maybe Citon. We have insurance companies that end up having to pool funds for potential investors. So they promise them, in this case, they'll be able to, for example, invest in other securities or maybe bonds, get interest, and they end up having to pay them. So we have, for example, in this case, what we call money market funds. It is run by insurance companies and other investment companies. So these become like those who are having to pool together funds from potential investors. So they're the commodity pool operators. So they have to be licensed, in this case, by the CMN for them to be able to undertake that role. So matters subject to consideration pertaining to intermediaries having to be licensed. So regulation should set conditions of entry of market intermediaries that make clear the basis of what participation. So all intermediaries should be able to know an outline or have an outline of how, in this case, they will participate, be part of the participants. They'll be able to participate in that particular market as intermediaries. So there should be regulations or guidelines to guide them as to how they'll be able to participate as intermediaries. Then regulation should determine whether participation in the market by an intermediary should be based upon demonstration of appropriate knowledge, resources, skills, and ethical attitude. So the ethical standards should actually be set. There should be that criteria, maybe in this case, to set ethical standards to be observed by maybe the intermediaries. resources they are supposed to have before they can, in this case, be licensed as intermediaries. The skills they must be able to, for example, in this case, portray in terms of their human capital capacity. So they have to portray certain kind of skills before, in this case, they can, for example, in this case, be licensed. Then the regulator should have the authority to refuse licensing of an intermediary if these requirements have not actually been met. Then there should be an initial capital requirement for securities firms as a condition of entry into the market. So this ensures that the owners of the business have a direct financial stake in the business. So the capital requirement should be maintained and should be subject of periodic reporting to the regulator or competent regulator in that particular case. So we have, for example, in this case, for the case of banks that are actually regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya. So before you set up a bank, then in this case, you should be able to meet a set criteria in terms of capital, whereby now in this case, the regulator will call upon you to deposit such kind of money as a reserve to the Central Bank of Kenya. So $500 million to the reserve of the Central Bank of Kenya before you can be able to start operating a bank. So if they are basically investment collection schemes that are having to be set up, so those who are having to set up these investment collection schemes should provide evidence of them having like a set criteria of a minimum capital before they can go ahead and actually start collecting funds from potential investors. So that simply basically indicates the level of stability, indicates the level of surety that in this case, you can be able to do what, maybe repay back or give back your money to the potential investors if they end up having to invest in the same scheme. So also in this case, it makes you to be a part owner of the scheme, whereby you will prudently be able to manage that particular collective investment scheme simply because you are part of the persons who have invested in the scheme. So that basically simply means that a criteria has to be set whereby minimum requirements in terms of what collection to the fund should actually be met by the intermediaries. So you can have different market intermediaries. Some of them have been able to mention them. We can have, for example, in this case, maybe investment banks, stockbrokers, and dealers. Investment banks serve as middlemen between a company and investors when the company wants to issue stock or bonds. So we have a number of them. For example, if you check around, the most famous one we had is known as Blair Bank. Blair Bank is one of the most common investment banks we've seen around. There are, of course, others. I've just forgotten the name, but they have very nice products in terms of what investments that you can be able to invest in. So we have investment banks, which play a key role in terms of what's having to be intermediaries. We have stock brokerage firms that can be set up. In this case, you want to invest, you go to such kind of stock brokers. They'll advise which are the most probable shares you can end up having to invest in currently. So we can have investment banks and actually stock brokers or maybe dealers. So investment banks can provide advice to you as a potential investor, where you can be able to invest your money. We have fund managers and investment advisors. So, different fund managers can actually basically be registered as intermediaries. We can have insurance companies having to manage your funds. We can have, for example, in this case, maybe banks having to be fund managers. And have banks having to be fund managers. So fund managers play an important role in the investment and financial world. They provide investors with a peace of mind, knowing their money is in the hands of an expert. So they are basically, the expertise comes in when you invest, for example, your money in a fund, an investment fund. There's usually that promise you're normally given that you'll get what interest. So the role of fund managers here now in this case is to manage those funds by, for example, making prudent investments whereby you can get a return. So probably in this case, they'll end up having to invest in maybe government bonds where there's actually a surety of return. Or maybe they can invest in other investment schemes or maybe vehicles that can bring about what revenue, which could be bonds or maybe in this case, treasury bills, which could be treasury bills. So hence, the main benefit of investing in a fund is trusting the investment management decisions to the professionals. So there are professionals who can be able to invest your money on your behalf, whereby they make prudent investments, which you wouldn't have made by yourself at a personal level. So that is the role they play. They are fund managers and investment advisors. So they advise you on which kind of investments you can be able to do it, take. Credit rating agencies. So we have what we call is it CRB or something? So credit rating agencies, they provide what? Rating services. It refers to a company that assigns credit ratings, which rate debtors' ability to do what? To pay back debt by making timely principal and interest payments and the likelihood of what? Default. So you have CRB. I think this one you must have heard about it. It's very common. If you default on a payment of a loan, then you'll be listed on the CRB, whereby if any other bank or lender wants to give you money, then they won't be able to give you the money. In this case, you have done what you have defaulted on payment in another company or entity. So you have what we call credit rating agencies. So in Kenya, there are a number of them. So we have Augusto, we have Metropole is very common. It is the most famously known, Metropole, Global Credit Rating. We have Care Ratings Africa. We have Embed Rating Services Limited. So those are part of the credit rating agencies that we have that basically play a key role in the financial markets as to the level of ability of investors to be able to what? Maybe make repayments or pay their money once they borrow. We have collective investment schemes whereby we can have unit trust or maybe mutual funds. So these ones sometimes in this case are usually managed by maybe insurance companies, maybe in this case investment companies, whereby you invest your money in a collective scheme. What do you mean by a collective investment scheme? It is that you're not the only one having to put the money in that basket. There are so many people having to put their money in the collective basket for the money to be invested. So there are schemes that pool funds from different investors and are managed by what? Professional fund managers. So the fund managers invest the pooled funds in a portfolio of securities with the aim of generating what? Returns to meet the specific objectives of the fund. So there's like a portfolio. So you've learned about portfolio management. So portfolio management where in advanced financial management, whereby you get money and basically invest in different portfolios. So what that is what they do. They basically pool funds from different investors in a collective scheme. Then they put the money in different portfolios. So the amount of the money they can be able to put it in maybe shares, are waiting to get what? Dividends. Others they can look to put it maybe in treasury bills or bonds. Others they could be able to put it in real estate, whereby if it is real estate, it appreciates in value. So once you sell, you get a return on that particular investment. So we call it what? A collective investment scheme. A collective investment scheme. So each investor's money is pooled together and spread over the whole range of assets within the fund. The investments in a fund is divided into units. The number of units held represent the individual's proportionate ownership of the fund over assets. The income and capital growth that those assets may generate. So if there's actually an income or any capital growth on the assets that have been invested in, that is what you'll end up having to benefit or gain as what? As an invest in that collective scheme. The prices of these units fluctuates because the underlying value of the assets will rise and fall. And since the total value of the fund is divided by the number of units issued, thus individual stake will rise and fall to reflect this. So different kind of funds will have different levels of what risks. Will have different levels of what risks. It just depends with where the money has actually been invested. So you have custodians or authorized depositories. Banks basically play this role of a custodian. You know, a custodian is someone who can be able to keep something on your behalf. So in this case, you can buy shares in a company and you put them in a depository in a bank that acts as your custodian. So they hold those shares on your behalf. A node transaction can actually end up having to happen. They are the ones who facilitate all kind of transactions on your behalf. It is whether you're having to make an investment, you're having to buy shares, they are the only ones who can be able to do it on your behalf. So you save yourself from the hassle and bustle of having to go to the stock exchange and basically look for the potential companies to invest in by yourself. You've given them that responsibility, whereby they are actually what? Custodians of maybe in this case, what? Your investments. So they do investments on what? On your behalf. You've given them the custody of your investments. So custodians or authorized depositories are responsible for the safekeeping of their clients' assets, as well as processing what? Their transactions. Although they are limited to fund clients, depositories' duties go further than this, as they also perform some oversight duties and are liable for any what? Losses. So they provide oversight duties where you invested your money. If they see something that is actually going out of what is expected, they can reach out to you as what? As you having, as them having to be your custodians. Then you have online foreign exchange brokers, online foreign exchange brokers. But before we continue with that, maybe we can take a break of about 5 minutes. Then we come back and actually proceed on. That will be okay, Caroline?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Yes, Caroline.
Yes.
Can we continue?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can look at online foreign exchange brokers and money managers. So we have those who are basically involved in the foreign exchange market, whereby they exchange currencies. So there are still intermediaries in the financial markets that ends up having to do what enable exchange of currencies. So it refers to financial services of a company that provides traders access to platform for buying and selling foreign currencies. So forex bureaus, so you have forex bureaus whereby you can go and actually exchange your currencies, whether you have dollars, you can get Kenyan shillings like that one. Transactions in the forex market are always between a pair of two different currencies. So we have like maybe Kenyan shillings against the dollar, or maybe Kenyan shilling against the US sterling, UK sterling pound. Online foreign exchange broker license means the entity is licensed by the authorities to act as a link between the online foreign exchange market and a client in return for a commission or a markup in spreads, and does not engage in market making activities such as buying or selling of foreign currencies. A money manager is a person or a financial firm that manages the securities portfolio of individuals or institutional investors. Professional money managers do not receive commissions on transactions, but are rather paid based on the percentage of assets under management. Then you have real estate investment trust or REITs. The most predominant one, a very famous one that happened recently in Kenya was the Fahari I-REIT. So the Fahari I-REIT, this is whereby investors pull together funds, and then the money is actually invested in real estate. So real estate, I simply mean, for example, properties are actually acquired like land. Then they do construction of houses or apartments. Then what happens? Rent collected from these kind of apartments is normally distributed as dividends, maybe to the investors who have invested in this kind of a trust. So the rate hasn't actually done so well in the Kenyan stock exchange. So the one that was actually listed for the first time was actually the Fahari I-REIT, I think around 2017 or 2018, but it didn't actually perform so well. So it ended up having to be delisted from the stock exchange. So the Fahari I-REIT was the first one, but it didn't actually perform so well. But ideally, under REITs or real estate investment trust is whereby investors pull together funds, then the money is actually invested in real estate. So what is gotten as an income from this real estate is what is actually normally distributed amongst the investors as a form of a dividends or interest. Foreign exchange bureaus, so these ones you've already been able to look at, foreign exchange bureaus or forex bureaus. So they facilitate or support in the exchange of currencies. Then you have private equity and venture capital firms. Private equity describes investment partnerships that buy and manage companies before selling them. So private equity firms operate these investment funds on behalf of institutional and accredited investors. Private equity firms buy companies and overhaul them to earn a profit when the business is sold again. So they buy companies and sell them to others who want to basically, for example, undertake the operations. Then you have venture capital firms. Firms. So they invest in early stage companies in exchange for equity or ownership stake. So venture capital is whereby, for example, you provide capital to a potential company that in this case wants to start off or maybe kickstart its operations. So what happens here, you basically provide like seed capital to start up the operations. Then once in this case, the company actually propels, you can end up having to be a part owner of that company. So you seek for an ownership stake in such kind of a company. So you invest by providing seed capital, then eventually in this case, that seed capital can contribute to you having to be part of the owners of that company. Then you have circles. So circles in this case take money on behalf of the depositors. And of course, at the end of the year, maybe in this case, they pay them dividends or interest on their deposits. So you can be able to get a loan. So they also still act as intermediaries. that facilitate what? Investments. So remember, in this case, this interest you're having to earn in a circle, they have invested the money on your behalf. So they have, for example, bought bonds. So once they buy the bonds, then of course they get interest at maybe a higher rate. Then of course they have their cut in terms of the management expenses of that fund, of that particular money you've deposited. Then they pay you maybe at 8% or maybe 10% as what? Maybe interest. They give out the money as loan. They get interest on the loan. The loan, they use it to manage their own expenses. And of course, what it remains, they pay you as a dividend, or maybe in this case as what? As interest on your deposits. Those are part of the intermediaries that we can be able to have. So we have circles, we have rates, we have fund managers, we have stock brokers, we have investment banks, we have custodian banks. So those are part of the intermediaries we can be able to have in the financial markets. So the obligations of licensed intermediaries, what is the role of these intermediaries we've just been able to look at? So they have to operate under set criteria or maybe principles of best practice, whereby, for example, they have to observe a high standard of integrity and fair dealing. They have to act with due skill, care, and actually diligence. They have to observe high standards of market conduct. So they have to have like a code of ethics or a code of integrity that's supposed to be observed. They have to operate under what set principles. So the principles of a code of conduct will include, for example, the requirement to act honestly and ethically and with integrity at all times as intermediaries, to act in the best interest of clients and treating clients what fairly, exercise care, skill, and diligence in their work. So they shouldn't basically act negligently. They have to act with care, skill, and actually diligence. Possess appropriate levels of professional knowledge and actually what experience or expertise. Disclose accurate and adequate information to their clients whenever the information is actually required. And then ensure the suitability of the regulated advice. Then avoid conflict of interest. Avoid conflict of interest. Then have sufficient safeguards in place to protect their client assets. So those are part of the principles, the code of ethics they have to observe: integrity, professional due diligence, whereby they have to undertake their work with care, skill, and actually diligence. They have to portray highest levels of professional knowledge and actually experience. They have to give accurate information to their potential clients who wants to invest money through them. They have to avoid any conflict of interest, whereby which could end up having to compromise their work or independence in terms of what? Their work. So those are the principles of the code, principles of code of conduct they are supposed to observe as intermediaries. So roles of an authorized depository when the appointment of a custodian is required. So the depository has the responsibility of keeping your financial assets like bonds, mutual funds, stocks, and other assets in a dematerialized format. A depository is a financial institute or bank that holds your funds, and you have to pay a certain charges to open an account with a depository participant linked to the main depository. So now in this case, we have what we call a depository that is normally maintained by the Capital Markets Authority. A depository is simply in this case like an online safe or maybe bank whereby you can put in this case deposit or maybe hold your securities in different types of companies. So the securities you can be able to hold there, it could be bonds, it could be, for example, in this case, investment in stocks or maybe investment in mutual funds. So there's the Capital Markets Authority, then in this case, has facilitated the operation of a central depository system. But in this case, if you want to open an account on it, you have to go through the market intermediaries or go through, this case, authorized agents to facilitate you having to open that particular depository account. So in short, a depository is simply, in this case, an online safe or maybe like a bank whereby you can be able to hold your securities and be able to transfer them in an electronic form. The securities here you can be able to hold there would include, for example, maybe bonds or maybe shares or maybe any forms of stocks that you've been able to make an investment in any kind of a company. If you want to transfer them, then in this case, you just be able to transfer them electronically. So a custodian may be appointed to hold scheme property and perform a range of related services when the entity is carrying out its obligations to ensure that the assets of a trust are actually protected. So the role of custodian or custodian banks, so they play, like in this case, maybe you basically invest in securities, but they hold custody on your behalf. So you have, in this case, a depository whereby you made the investments, and of course you can be able to see the investments in an electronic form. But in this case, there's a custodian who's having to hold the securities on your behalf. He can be able to invest on your behalf according to what your instructions. So custodians play a key role in safeguarding the wealth of what? Investors. So some of these roles will include, for example, legal ownership of our scheme assets, then recording transactions in the identifiable accounts, then reconciliation of bank accounts, then execution of documents and reporting, holding of assets separately to other assets, ensuring they are protected against what? Theft or loss by anyone. Then by appointing a custodian, a responsible entity will be meeting legal requirements and derives to get some other benefits, such as ensuring assets are properly segregated from the assets of other trusts, then safeguarding asset portfolios to protect investors, then enabling the responsible entity or trustee and trust manager to concentrate on managing the fund, then assisting with the marketing of the fund to investors by increasing investors' confidence, then demonstrating corporate governance practices, then protecting investors' assets in the event of insolvency or liquidation of the responsible entity or trustee under which it has been invested, then utilizing the custodian scale to minimize transaction costs and operational efficiency of the fund or maybe assets under custody. Fund under custody. So those are basically the market intermediaries. So hope you've been able to learn something, you've understood what you mean by market intermediaries. So I want us to introduce topic number 5. We call it Central Securities Depository. Central Securities Depository. So I think I've been able to mention something about it. So under the Capital Market Authority Act, there is a company or a corporation we call the Central Depository and Settlement Corporation. We call it the Central Depository and Settlement Corporation. Let's say, for example, today you want to make an investment. You as Carol, you want to make an investment in a public listed company or in a public company. What I mean by a public listed company or a public company, it is a company that in this case has been listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. And of course, now in this case, for a company to be listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, it is not each and every company that will have to be listed there. Companies must be able to meet a set criteria by the Securities Exchange requirements before they can be listed. For example, in this case, it basically comprises a set minimum share capital requirement. You should be able to meet that. Also, it basically calls upon you having to have what you call proper governance structures, proper corporate governance structures, whereby you have like an appointed board of directors that manages the affairs of that particular public company. So a certain criteria has to be met in this case, for example, before a company can be listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. So let's assume today, in this case, you want to make an investment in a company listed there on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. So what happens in this case, you'll actually be called upon to open what we call a Central Depository System account. So this Central Depository System account, it is operated under what we call a Central Depository System that is normally maintained by this body we call the Central Depository and Settlement Corporation. So you'll go through an intermediary, a stockbroker, or an investment firm, or maybe investment company that will be able to facilitate or enable you open what we call a CDS, Central Depository System account, through a CDS agent, through a Central Depository System agent, who could be a stockbroker. Then once you open that account, when you buy the shares in that listed company, those shares will be deposited in your depository or in your account, whereby you'll end up having to hold them electronically. You'll simply basically be logging in to confirm which kind of companies you've been able to invest in, so long as in this case, they are public listed companies. So if you want in this case to make an investment, you simply open what we call what a central depository system account. But in this case, it's normally maintained under a central depository system, which is actually a system maintained by the Central Depository Settlement Corporation, which is set up under the Capital Markets Authority Act. So that's what we mean by a central depository system, a central depository system, Central Securities Depository. So a central securities depository is a computer system operated by the CDSE. It is a specialized financial organization holding securities like shares, either in a certificated or uncertificated form. A central securities depository can also be defined as an institution that holds financial instruments, equities, bonds, money market instruments, and mutual funds in an electronic form. It allows ownership of those instruments to be transferred electronically. You know, like in this case, how you normally transfer your money. So once your shares are on this particular platform, you can transfer them how? Electronically. Through updating of what you call what? Electronic records or book entry records. It is this particular body, we call it the Central Depository Settlement Corporation. It is a quality provider of clearing and settlement services in the Kenya capital markets. In order to boost investor confidence in the market, the CDSE has created customized solutions, which will ensure that the investor is aware of transactions that happen in the CDS account whenever they occur. For example, you'll be notified, maybe through an SMS, that in this case, there has been a particular transaction, or maybe your CDS account, maybe your shares have been transferred like that. So there are two types of central depository systems: the domestic central securities depository, then the international central securities depository. So domestic, many countries have one domestic CSD that was traditionally associated with what National Stock Exchange. These organizations are typically heavily regulated by the government and may or may not be separate from the exchanges where trading in securities does what occurs. Then you have the International Central Securities Depository. Is a central securities depository that settles shares in the international securities markets, like for example, the Eurobonds, So the Eurobonds are actually acquired through what we call what's the International Central Securities Depository, because in this case, those ones are having to be acquired on the international market. So objectives of the Central Depository and Settlement Corporation. So to provide central clearing, settlement, and depository services for securities, whether held in electronic form or otherwise. Then to establish and operate a depository and centralized system for the transfer and registration of securities. Then to promote and effect, participate in, manage, and carry out any issue of public or private or of corporate, state or municipal loans. So that is basically what is actually basically played by the Central Depository and Settlement Corporation. So I think we can end there. So we'll wind up on this particular area of establishment of the Central Depository. I don't know when we can have a class, so I'm always held up. So that is the challenge with me now. So like right now in this case, I have classes packed the whole of the evening hours up to Friday. So even that Friday you are investing. So there's another class that I'm having to handle. So unless we start on Friday around 7, maybe we do up to 8. Will that be okay?
Yes, it will be okay.
Will you be? Because sometimes in this kind of found you're not found. That's also easy to find during the day.
This week I am on leave, so
You
I
are on
will be
leave.
available that time. Maybe from next week I will not.
Or you are on leave. So what we do,
Yes. Yes.
so tomorrow is Wednesday. Tomorrow, can we have a class tomorrow? Maybe we can do a class tomorrow. Let's see, maybe from around 8 to 9 a.m. Would that be okay?
8 to 9 a.m.
Yes.
Yes, we can. No. Okay, tomorrow. Tomorrow in the morning I have been called to the office, so I will not be available in the morning hours.
Or you'll be available what time?
Maybe in the afternoon or in the evening.
In the afternoon or in the evening? Maybe let's talk
Yes.
at 1. Let's talk tomorrow at 1 and see.
Okay.
So let's talk tomorrow at 1 and see whether we can cover something before you go back.
Okay.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.